Welcome to Business Reporters, the Future CEO campaign hosted by the Telegraph Online. What comes to your mind if I say the word culture? Definitely nothing as specific as assets, liabilities, revenues, or profit. Still, culture is a returning word in the business conversation. So why is that? Why is it so important? Why do we have to measure it? This is what I'm going to discuss with
Richard Barrett. I'm chairman of the Barrett Value Center. Today, we're going to talk about the leaders of the future.
Good morning, Richard.
Good morning, Andras.
Okay, first and most important question, what is culture?
I've come across many definitions of culture in my time, but the simplest and the most practical I've ever come across is culture is the way we do things around here.
Around here means organizations, businesses.
Usually we're talking about organizations, yes.
We have an organization, we have a culture. Who is defining what the culture is in that organization? Whose responsibility it is?
The culture is a reflection of the values, beliefs, and behaviors of the leaders, of the current leaders, and also the legacy of past leaders, in the sense that they have embedded their values, beliefs, and behaviors into the systems, policies, procedures, and even the structures. So it's both. It's the current leaders and the legacy of past leaders.
Now, you are advocating that culture is something that can be measured, should be measured, and we really have to learn from that. We will get back to that point in a minute, but the real question is that if it's about businesses, if it's about organizations, productivity, efficiency, why do we need to measure culture? Why isn't it enough to measure what we have always measured? Revenues, profits, productivity.
Well, those normal measures are basically outputs and outcomes. And when you measure outputs and outcomes, it's like trying to drive a car and in front of you on the dashboard is you've only got a rear view mirror. So these are all lag indicators. They tell you what happened in the past. Whereas the cultural indicators are lead indicators. They give you a sense of what is happening now. That enables you to make decisions before, let me put it this way, bad things happen. Let me give you an example. In 2008, it was August, I mapped the values of the culture of Iceland, the whole nation. And they had what I call a high level of cultural entropy. That's a degree of dysfunction in the system. I was surprised. Anyhow, I went to Iceland at the beginning of September and I said to the Icelandic people, I said, if you were an organization, you'd be going bankrupt about now. And 2 weeks later, they went bankrupt.
They went bankrupt, okay. You mentioned this term cultural entropy.
Yeah.
Could you give me a definition for that, what it is?
Yeah, cultural entropy is the degree of dysfunction in the system. It's caused basically by the fear-based beliefs of the leaders. You know, if you've ever worked in an organization and you have a leader who is demanding, who is manipulating, who blames other people, that's cultural entropy.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about this cultural entropy. Let's say we are a business. Give me an example. What are we working on?
A bank.
A bank. Okay, so we are a bank. You are invited to do your assessments. You identify weaknesses. You identify what this cultural entropy is about. Could you give me an example? What could go wrong?
What we do is we actually do an assessment by asking the employees what are their personal values, what values do they see in the organization, that's the current culture, and what values would they like to see in an organization, that's the desired culture. And the employees get to choose from positive words such as creativity, openness, teamwork, and what I call potentially limiting values, call them negative values if you like blame, demanding, internal competition, hierarchy, bureaucracy. So the employees get to pick 10 values that represent how the organization operates. So the proportion of values that they pick, which are these limiting values, represents the level of cultural entropy. It turns out to be a really prime indicator of dysfunction in an organization. Now, the inverse of cultural entropy is cultural health. So, for example, if you've got an organization with 30% cultural entropy, it has 70% cultural health, whereas an organization with only 10% cultural entropy has 90% cultural health. And in that organization, you'll find the employees are really committed, they bring their whole selves to work, and they bring also their discretionary energy. They love what they do because their needs are taken care of by the organization.
One thing that you have mentioned, that when you do this assessment, employees choose values. I'm trying to visualize the process. So does it mean that you are giving them a list of possible values and they pick from it?
Yes, so what happens is, before the survey starts, there's quite an art to this. We build a template of values that is customized for that particular organization. You know, if it's a hospital, it'll have words like patient care, whereas if it's a bank, it'll be customer care. So we customize the list of words that they can pick from, about 80 or 90, including positive and potentially limiting values. And then we put the survey online, and employees go to that survey and answer the 3 questions. What are my personal values? What values do you see in the organization? And what values would you like to see? Now, before they answer those 3 questions, we also ask them, what gender they are, what level they are in the organization, what business unit they're in, demographics, so that later we can pull out the data and do the analysis by employee groups.
You have also mentioned 30%, 70% of entropy or cultural health. 70% of what?
Okay, so it's just an indicator. It's not a percentage of, it's an indicator. So when we say that cultural entropy is 30%, we know there's a relatively high level of dysfunction. When we say cultural health is 70%, we know it's a relatively healthy culture where there are matching values between people's personal values, the ones that they pick, and the current culture, and matching values between the current culture and the desired culture. So when you have a lot of matching values, it means you have a healthy culture, and employees feel that they can bring their whole selves to work, and they feel the organization is on the right track.
Why should I trust the answer of these employees? Their answers could depend on, do they have a good day, a bad day? Are they being just promoted, just fired? Why are these answers so trustworthy?
Well, basically, we've been doing this for 20 years, and what we have found is that the 99.9% of the cases they're trustworthy. Why? Well, when people answer the question, which are your values, pick 10 values that represent who you are, they may pick aspirational value. We know that, that's okay. But when you ask them what are the values or how is your organization operating? What values do you see in the organization? They usually answer very honestly. They tell you what's on their mind because it's confidential, the survey. And then they ask them, well, what values would you like to see? The answer to that question is often the values they pick are the antidotes to the things that are not working. And as I said, we've done this thousands of times in 40 or 50 different countries, and we find that when we look at the answers and we follow through, everything changes for the better.
Is this your method, the way you are operating here? So is this fully something that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I invented this 20 years ago, but I have to say I was standing on the shoulders of Abraham Maslow. He had that beautiful model of hierarchy of needs. I extended that model and made it into 7 levels of consciousness. And I recognize that each of the 7 levels, there are specific values that link to each level of consciousness. So if I ask you, what are your values? And you tell me, then I can tell you what levels of consciousness you're operating from.
Okay, so you are inviting me to do an experiment on this?
Sure.
Okay, so ask me the question, please.
Well, give me your top 3 values in your personal life.
Never give up.
All right. Perseverance.
Okay. Loyalty. Oh my God, I always want to say good food. Does it?
Healthy food.
Is it healthy food?
All right. So
I'm not sure about healthy, but let's say that would be my
good food.
third.
Okay. Well, healthy food, that's level 1. That's survival. You need that for nutrition. Loyalty, level 2. That's relationships. And perseverance is usually around level 4 consciousness because it means you're ambitious and you're going to get what you want in the end. So
So what is level 7?
Aha!
What would be there?
Yeah, so in a personal context, level 7 would be forgiveness, compassion, things of that nature. But in an organizational context, it would be thinking about the future, long-term perspective. Many organizations just focus on the short term. It would be thinking about future generations. It would be thinking about long-term sustainability, the impact of what you're doing on the planet, for example. That would be level 7.
I'm going to represent for a minute the very cynical CEO.
Okay.
And probably that very cynical CEO would say that, what do I care about these very human and very emotional things? I have a contract with my employees. That contract is describing everything, including their rights. Why do we need to get into this? What is the additional value that I get from this that I cannot get from a well-drafted contract?
Well, because people operate from emotions and from needs. Everybody has specific needs. The 7 levels of consciousness model is also a model of needs. So if you don't have much money, guess what? You're operating at the survival level and you want good pay. If you, at the second level, like you suggested, loyalty, that's a relationship level, you like to have friends and that's a need for you, that's important. And at the next level, it's about professional competence and so on as we go up. And level 5 is about finding meaning in existence. When people get to the age of 40, they've got to the point where they say, wow, I need more. And the more they need is a sense of meaning in their work. And then when they get to the 50s, they say, you know what, I want to make a difference. 60s, like me, all you want to do is be of service. You just want to make a contribution. So as you go through the stages of life, your needs change, and whatever you need is what you value. And so your values change as you go through life. And so that cynical CEO, guess what? He wants to be successful, doesn't he? Every CEO wants to be successful. So what he has to understand is that if he can align the culture to meet the needs of his employees, they're going to show up and give him everything they can. And that makes him more successful.
At one point, do organizations and their leaders realize they have to contact you, they have to make a change? What is triggering usually this conversation?
There are 2 or 3 scenarios there. First of all, I can tell you a particular scenario. It happened, it's a great example, goes back to about 2003, 2004. One of the biggest banks in South Africa, they were going bankrupt. They brought in a new CEO. He invited McKinsey to come in, help develop a strategy, and then he said, we need to focus on culture, and he called us in. And we started working with him, measuring the culture of that organization for the next 12, 15 years, actually. And every year we did the cultural values assessment. He saw what was important, and I'm going to call those are values jumps. Let's say in an organization it was 27,000 people. Let's say accountability got, say, 3,000 votes in the current culture, but got 8,000 in the desired culture. That means a values jump of 5,000. So guess what? That was the highest values jump. So you better focus on accountability. So every year he found 3 things to work on, and gradually, year by year, the cultural entropy dropped from like 25% to 19% to 17% to 12%, and where it leveled off. And each year, every other indicator went up. Income went up, employee engagement went up, everything positive just went up because people felt that the leadership cared about their needs and were being listened to, because the values assessment was actually telling the leaders, this is what is not working and this is what we'd like to see happen.
Okay, so what you are claiming here is that culture is important. We know why it's important. It's measurable.
Absolutely.
And you can write an action plan based on what you have measured.
Absolutely.
Right. You write an action plan. Does that action plan include tangible targets, like, for example, revenues and profits?
Measurement matters. Whatever you can measure, you can manage. And what we've done at the Barrett Values Center is we've made the intangibles tangible. We can measure culture by mapping values to the 7 levels of consciousness model. It's a false idea to think that by focusing on making money, you're going to make money. No. The key is your employees. And when their needs are met, they will be creative, they'll bring their discretionary energy to their work, and everything will improve. Well, you know, we've seen it so many times, it's an old story now, but for somebody who's a little skeptical, it sounds, well, my goodness, how do you do that? Well, let me tell you one of the keys, because something I really wanted to mention earlier in the interview. You know, the culture of the organization is actually a reflection of the values, beliefs, and behaviors of the leader. So if you want to transform the culture, guess what? You either have to change your leaders or your leaders have to change. That means personal transformation, because the leaders set the culture.
You are talking about something that sounds terribly, terribly difficult, changing the attitude. Changing the attitude of a leader who is probably not 20 years old, probably 40, 50, 60 year old. Is it possible at all?
Yeah, people are skeptical, but absolutely it's possible. And, you know, apart from measuring the culture, we have other instruments that measure the values of the leader. So the leader goes online and picks 10 values about how he operates, and he invites 15 of his colleagues, he chooses 15 to go online and pick 10 values about how he operates. And then we compare his values against the levels of consciousness, against the top 10 values of all of these 15 people, the values they see in him. And the feedback is absolutely transformative. Sometimes the leader's values and the way people see him are exactly the same. And that's what we call an authentic leader. And that guy has a low personal entropy, and he's probably a very, very good leader. Then you get the other one where the leader has values, thinks he has values all in the upper levels of consciousness, and the people who are assessing him think he has values in the lower levels. And they pick values like demanding, manipulating, blame. So he finishes up with a level of personal entropy at 15 and 20%. Now, this can be a bit of a shock for the leader when he gets this feedback. So the feedback comes in the form of a 2-hour coaching session. And so, you know, we say to the leader, okay, these values that you picked, you know, are obviously important values for you to do what you want. But guess what? They're not coming across. This is what's coming across. How successful are you going to be if you're not getting these values across? This is what people are seeing. So it would be really good if you could work on this, because it would improve your success.
If you are looking around today in the UK or in the world, how far are we from fully understanding the necessity of these changes and the necessity of understanding the culture that is present in our organization?
Okay, so that's an interesting question, because you asked me earlier, you know, who comes and who wants to do it? And I said, well, you know, when people have a really difficult situation in the organization, they'll come because they realize it's something to do with culture. But there are plenty of organizations and leaders who come to us and say, look, we're doing quite well, but we could do better. So we'd like you to help us do better. Find out what is working and not working, and help us to move forward. So we've mapped the values of many organizations which have, say, 10, 12, 15% cultural entropy, quite healthy organizations. But because of the detail in which that comes out from the assessment, we can say, you know what, you need to focus more on innovation, or you need to focus more on accountability. And so that's what they do next year. And things improve when they do that. What happens then is they come back year after year because they can see the tangible improvements in their bottom line results.
You have written a book recently about this.
Yes.
Tell me about the book.
It's the second edition of the Values-Driven Organization, and the byline for it is Cultural Health and Employee Wellbeing as a Pathway to Sustainable Performance. And so what I'm really emphasizing here is it's about the culture and how you treat your employees, because every employee wants to grow and develop. So if you can become what I call a deliberately developmental organization, take care of whatever needs your employees are at the stage of development they're at, they will love you. They'll be loyal, they'll be committed, and they'll come to work. In fact, they'll get up in the morning, like leap out of bed and can't wait to get to work, because they're getting their needs met, basically. As I said earlier, whatever you need is what you value, and when you do a values assessment, it tells you exactly what the employees need.
Well, culture seems to be very, very important in any success or failure of an organization. It's very interesting to hear all this. Richard, thank you very much.
Thank you.